Well, here's hoping that Flurry Heart is handled properly. Okay, well maybe this is just a one-time... But surely the plot can't possibly rely on her presence 3 times within the same 20 minutes.
You need to combine it with something else. Something unique to the relic itself. Something that strengthens it and provides it with power.
The crystalling!
Fuck. And so begins the long journey through Season 6. And it all starts at the Crystalling, an episode that introduces 2 new characters, Flurry Heart and Sunburst. So after much anticipation for this episode, for better or worse, it's time to see how it turned out. Was it good? Was it bad? I'll get to that as I go along. Twilight receives a notification that Shining and Cadence's baby is going to have their crystalling, which also gives Twilight an opportunity to teach Starlight her first lesson in friendship, rekindling her relationship with Sunburst. The gang travels to the Crystal Empire and the gang splits up into 2, where Twilight learns that the baby is an alicorn, and, according to Celestia, the first alicorn-born baby. Boy, doesn't that raise a lot more questions. The crystalling is being set up when the baby Flurry Heart, unable to contain her magic, ends up destroying the crystal heart and its protective magic over the city. Now a snowstorm threatens the Empire as the gang races to figure out how to restore the heart's power while Starlight rekindles her relationship with Sunburst. I'll try to be fair and start with stuff that I like because frankly there are things to like about this episode. For starters, the main 6 and Spike seem to be in good form. None of them really outshine each other, getting the proper amount of screen time each, and even get some good humor across with their conversations. They don't really do anything all that important, which could be seen as an excuse to shoehorn all of them into the story together, but nonetheless they still have some good lines. My personal favorite would have to be Spike, who helps Starlight cope with her stress as she's about to reunite with Sunburst. Instead of just being a foil or a voice of reason to Starlight's anxiety, he actually tries to be helpful, giving advice and providing confidence to assist her. It shows that he's learning how to be more involved in a situation, and it would make sense that he would learn something like this being under Twilight's wing for so long. And while we're at it, Starlight is actually a much more likable character here. Her struggle in this episode, while a little bit too obvious at times, is still very understandable and relatable as well. She shows a genuine sense of regret for her past actions, and it affects her self-esteem. But not to the point that she completely distances herself from others. She still has a willingness to express herself to others and even to face some of her past transgressions. And the thought of being reunited with her friend while under the stress of how he'll judge her for her past is surprisingly deep. There's this one scene where her mind completely blocks out everything around her and she's overwhelmed with stress and is literally seconds away from breaking down in panic.
Of course, that's just one idea. We could also go to Griffinstone. Making friends with a griffin is a challenge all by itself. Or we could tag along with the CMCs the next time they try to help a pony who can't figure out why they're special. Starlight? Is something wrong?
That's actually some pretty effective stuff. Shining Armor is absolutely hilarious. After all the criticisms towards him just being a generic brother to Twilight, seeing him have all of these freakouts as an overly stressed father is the closest thing to a character he's ever had. These freakouts make for some very fitting expressions and a lot of fast-paced humor, but it also has some slower moments to show that being a parent can be very tiring. It all fits together well and it adds to his personality. The animation is, well, still good. There's a lot of detail in the environments and it's even shot well in several different angles, though I'm not quite sure if the animation has evolved in any way. None of it looks very different compared to Season 5, and a lot of it seems to look the same. I think the closest thing that we get to astounding is at the crystallizing near the end. We get to see bright colors and glowing reflections of light and shimmering glazes, which does give the episode visual appeal, if only so briefly. This is a very minor nitpick, but I'm not exactly sure how the animation of the Flash can be evolved any further. Maybe they could add some more fluidness to the character's movements, but at this time, I can't really think of anything else. Alright, now let's get into the not-so-good stuff about the episode. Firstly, the pacing can be very distracting at times. It's not that it's pasted too fast or too slowly, but what makes it distracting is how noticeable the transitions are. Like, the switching between different plot points becomes very obvious throughout, and even more so in the second half. I think what would have helped the pacing a lot more is if Sunburst was with Shining Armor at the time so that the characters wouldn't have to split up and they'd all be in one spot. The writing for the episode would have been altered in some way, but with this technique they wouldn't have to switch between plot points so much. The meeting between Starlight and Sunburst is really underwhelming. After seeing that so much of Starlight's character came from how she felt about her friend leaving her, I thought to myself that there should be a situation where she reunites with Sunburst. I appreciate that the writers went with this idea, but the way it's executed is very, very shallow. Think about how emotionally powerful this scene could have been. The two haven't seen each other in years, and Starlight was hurt about this most of all. Starlight begins to break down crying at the sight of him, and they both share a hug, and they start to talk about what it was like growing up without each other. This really would have been effective, and especially if they haven't seen each other for so long. Instead of all that, they just sit around not knowing what to talk about, which makes the situation very awkward. The point of this reunion was to establish empathy for Starlight by showing us how much Sunburst is supposed to mean to her, to the point that she'd be willing to take revenge against the world because he left her. By the end of this plot point, it doesn't feel like anything about their friendship has been strengthened, and if anything, it feels like the establishment for it has become worse since neither of them really showed how much it's supposed to matter to them. Hopefully the writers will touch onto this more in the future, but as of now, it just feels like a really, really weak side point. There's also the matter of a lot of exposition on things that we seem to know from previous episodes. While these can be seen as continuity nods, they can also be seen as the characters repeating stuff that we already know, and it becomes really obvious later on. It wasn't too distracting, but they could definitely do less of it in the future. Alright, now let's get to the moment that we've all been waiting for, my feelings towards Flurry Heart. The first thing to mention is the choice for her design and, well, the fact that she's an alicorn. Either you're okay with it, or you're really annoyed by it. Firstly, I have to say that the design just looks really unbalanced. Aside from those really wide eyes compared to the smaller solid-colored eyes that we're normally used to, it's just really distracting seeing this small body with such a long horn and a big pair of wings. Now, I know people are going to say that I shouldn't criticize the eyes because Applejack was given the same type of eyes in the one where Pinkie knows, even though this contradicts her eye design in the Apple family reunion, but I just want to state for the record for everybody who's been worrying about it is that I don't have a problem with the character's design. Hell, even the fact that she's an alicorn won't bother me so much if the writers touch upon alicorn lore in the future. The problem that I have with Flurry Heart is that the episode treats her like a plot device. Not only does she cause the problem that the characters have to solve, but she actively prevents them from getting to the solution a lot quicker. And, wouldn't you know it, her crystalling is what restores the Crystal Heart and saves the day. When she's not involved in any of those things, she's just flying around and looking cutesy. She doesn't do anything important until the plot demands it, and it makes her less of a character. This is especially terrible because this is exactly what I was afraid would happen. The writers only use her as a means to create and resolve the conflict instead of emoting a connection between her and the audience. And that's not a good sign. The only good thing I can say about Flurry Heart at this time is that this is her very first appearance, and hopefully future episodes will handle her with more care. Alright, there's still a few more things that I should mention before I wrap this up. Firstly, the appearance of Twilight's parents at the end is a very nice touch. It makes sense that they would show up seeing as how they're grandparents now, but seeing that they got a speaking role is what really adds to them. And who knows, maybe that babysitting episode I mentioned in my wish list could be about them trying to take care of Flurry Heart. It would really strengthen the dynamic of Twilight's family if they did. There's a wonderful scene at the end where Twilight learns that distancing yourself from your student and allowing them to make their own decisions is part of being a teacher, and it manages to get the lesson across just as the episode is ending. It's not brief and it's not all in your face about it, it just tells it like it is. And for this to come from Spike shows a lot of promise for him later in the season. And lastly, as much as I was disappointed by the reunion between Starlight and Sunburst, Sunburst himself has a very relatable dilemma that adds to his character dynamic. He was hailed for being talented at magic and was even sent off to improve on his gift, and even then he didn't end up getting where he thought he would be in life. It especially hurts him because so many people were expecting something from him and he just couldn't deliver on those expectations. But at the end of the episode, he understands that even if he has a lot of untouched potential, his contribution was still important to the Crystal Empire. In fact, seeing this kind of character development just wants me to see him and Starlight get together even more. Both of them established evolution with their character, and there's still a lot of opportunities for them to strengthen their relationship. Hopefully, sometime later down the road, we'll get an episode where they rekindle their friendship while talking about what it was like growing up without each other in their childhood. That would actually make for a really good episode. And that's my review of The Crystalling. Was it good? Well, yeah, it actually was. The characters are well tuned, the artistry is still strong, and it brings up a lot of good speculation on what could be touched upon in the future. Though that's not to say that it's perfect. The problems that the episode has are still very noticeable problems, and they're big problems, and can ruin the episode for a lot of people. But it didn't for me. Okay, it came close, but in the end, it was a well put together experience. I'd still really appreciate it if the writers touched upon the Alicorn lore, and especially after that line of dialogue by Celestia, but I can't really bring myself to say that I disliked the episode. There's still a lot of potential for the rest of the season, and I can safely say that it's off to a good start. The Crystalling isn't one of the show's stronger two-parters, but despite this, it still comes across as an entertaining episode. One that I'll most likely be seeing again sometime soon. MisAnthro Pony, over and out.